Okay. Good evening. It's now 6:35 and I'm calling the Dayton Historical Commission meeting, the Selection Committee meeting to order here in Old Town Hall. I'm Pat Gales and I'm the chairperson. And with us tonight, Rafa. Who are you?
Hi, Stacy.
It's Rafa Delphin.
Hello, Gail Salvi.
Gail Salvi. Bill Pruitt.
Nickerson,
Pam-
hello.
Pat Olson.
Hi.
And sitting behind the screen is
Ken Pacheco.
Ken Pacheco, our Board of Selectmen liaison. So first, can you just introduce yourself to us?
Yes. As you've already figured out, my name is Stacy Spies. I've been living in Massachusetts for about 11 or 12, 12 years now. But before that, I lived in New Jersey for a long time. And I got a master's degree in historic preservation at University of Pennsylvania way back in the early 90s. So I used to do a lot of regulatory work in my right out of grad school. That's how you pay for grad school loans. And then I took some time, I went out on my own about 21 years ago. Oh my goodness. And then I took a little time off when my daughter was younger. And now she is 19. And as soon as she was back in high school, I was working full time again. So since then, I guess that's about 5 or 6 years ago now, I've been doing historic site surveys, usually up on the North Shore. That's because of where my daughter was going to high school, but I'm back home in Hopkinton now. So I'm able to do all sorts of new locations. I've done lots of register nominations and historic American building survey documentation. But what I really kind of got into a groove with is the survey documentation, the townwide surveys. I like kind of getting the big picture as opposed to just kind of popping in and doing a building here and there. I like kind of getting the bigger picture. One thing that I think I mentioned in the cover letter was what Dayton, what you all are looking for sounds like it's a lot like what I did up in West Newbury. They had surveys, some houses, the older, some of the older ones done back in the 70s, and then nothing. And then they started seeing some tear downs and started to get a little nervous. And so they kind of said, you know what, we need to figure out, and things people might have thought were historic around the bicentennial were usually of more of the, this is a pretty old house, or we think somebody important slept here. So also it was harder to get hold of a lot of the documentation. So now in, the 21st century, so much of it is online. We get, kind of got, it's the good and the bad. You can do the detective work more easily, but there's also so much more to cover. And certainly MHC has upped the bar on what they hope you can find out. So I really do like the detective work part of it. I like knowing, who lived there, why'd they build that, why here, what was the bigger story going on. That might be enough to get you all started.
Pause for a moment. So I forgot to do the pledge for the opening of the meeting. So if you
Oh,
could all
okay.
join me.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thank you. Okay, we do have some questions for you, of course. Rafa, are you starting? Is that what I said? Oh, good. How are you? And joining us is Mike Mullen, our town administrator.
How are you? How are you? Hey, Ralph, how are you?
Do you know how to get it on the big screen?
Oh, I'll be happy.
Oh, good. We're going to put you on the big screen.
Oh dear, I'll probably be able to see myself. This will be a very interesting.
You on this town Zoom?
Yeah.
Okay. So what I'll do, I'm gonna log in.
I think so, yeah. Oh, there we go. Oh, okay.
All right, you can turn your microphone.
Turn my microphone off? Okay.
Yeah. One second. So, yes, Stacy, can you hear us?
Bring the microphone down here. It's
Uh,
over there on the bench, I think.
Stacy, can you hear us?
Yes.
Perfect. Perfect. So that should work, Stacy.
And now we'll begin with our questions. Rafa, we're going to do number 1 or 2? Okay. Rafa?
Hi, Stacy. Here's a question for you. Could you tell us a bit about your experience with community-wide survey projects that are similar to Dayton's?
Yes. Oops, sorry, my lighting's gone a little wonky. It'll come back. Yes, what I found is usually the survey forms you already have are pretty helpful. I mean, they're not always, there's usually a kernel of, you know, if they're not fully accurate, they're the best that they could, you know, local history has. So it's a really good jumping off place. I found that sometimes they're really useful when doing new history, or sometimes they're not. But if nothing else, it's a really good starting point. One thing I found in towns kind of at a starting place where the Dayton's in is kind of reevaluating, you know, and it's from looking at your kind of your target list, it sounds like you're in a really good place. It looks like you've kind of got an idea of some of the earliest buildings, maybe some of the ones that are a little more endangered of maybe a tear down. So it looks like sometimes towns need a little more guidance with kind of what they want and what they're trying to achieve in terms of goals. But it looks like you guys are actually in pretty good shape. It looks like you've got a good plan going.
Okay. Good. Thank you. Gail?
Hello, Stacey. What made you submit a proposal in response to Dayton's RFQ?
I'm sorry, that question I couldn't hear. I'm sorry.
What made you submit a proposal in response to Dayton's RFQ?
Oh, to Dayton. Well, it was interesting because I've found I've really been gravitating towards the more, you know, more suburban or rural surveys. I kind of, as opposed to the more urban ones. And I like, I was familiar with some of the area. I have a friend who lives over in Freetown, but I hadn't actually, when I did some driving around Dayton, I really, if for no other reason, it really reminded me, all the Greek revival houses really reminded me a lot of Hopkinton. So it felt very familiar in terms of development, kind of what was going on right around the same time around things I look at every day. So it made me chuckle. I was like, yep, this is all Greek revival. This place was hopping in the 1840s and 1850s. So Dayton really appealed to me for that.
Okay, thank you. Bill?
Hi, Stacy, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Can you tell us about a time when you had a project complete with a tight deadline?
I would say, yeah, that's always been, it's an interesting one. And actually in COVID, it's actually been a little bit easier. I have found, I did find when I was doing my first survey up here, I was working on Groveland, and I did not adequately give enough time for that. So it involved, it was a lot of around the clock work, but I made it happen. And we can ask my teenage daughter whether or not I was available much when that was happening. Since then, I've learned to really pace things out a lot sooner. And actually, don't tell MHC this, but I do actually, or actually you could tell them, I do actually try and get started earlier than I know the first phase of this townwide surveys are usually a lot of planning, but I do start to kind of squirrel away information in my, while we're officially still choosing the target list, I do start actually doing some work ahead of time, because I found that makes my life happier at the back end, because it really is phase 3 when the forms are being completed that the workload gets a little heavy. So I've gotten smarter, and I start some of the phases before I'm technically supposed to. And that seems to work well, especially as you start moving into phase 2, where the consultant starts to do kind of sample forms to get a feel for it. I try and move that up just to pace it a little better, because otherwise you end up with a lot of work all crunched into those 20 weeks. So I've learned when that did not, when I didn't do such a good job of that, and I have learned to definitely get started earlier, even earlier than the schedule says I should be.
Okay,
Lesson
thank you.
learned.
Pam? Hi, Stacy. Would you tell us your experience with a project that involved the Massachusetts Historical Commission grant and CPC funding, please?
Excuse me. Yes. Actually, I keep going back to West Newbury, but that was I really enjoyed doing 2 phases, and they tell me they have a 3rd phase in the works. That one actually was CPC funded as well. And so that actually ended up being interesting. One of the things that I've learned actually that we should try and set aside some money for, if you can, is get some GIS time to help do the maps. I found that to be really helpful. And actually on the other side of it, I'm actually on my local historical commission as well. I'm also chair of the Historic District Commission. But I'm on this side now. I'm doing the CPC funding, MHC applications to do phase 2 of Hopkinton. I won't do it. I'll be seeing another, having another consultant do it. But it's been interesting seeing it from that side too, learning kind of what needs to fit within CPC and what needs to fit with MHC. But I found it works really well. MHC, they've got this down to a science. They do so many of these a year that, and I will say, actually, the one good thing that's come out of COVID was they used to require visits down to Dorchester to their offices for the phase meetings, which takes a lot of time. And now we do it all via Zoom or on the phone, and that is much better. But yeah, I really enjoy working with Michael Steinitz and Peter Stott, and so I think it. I imagine this would go off just as easily as those would.
Thank you.
Hi, Stacy. I am currently struggling, and underline the word struggling, to document 2 homes in my family that are both in town, and they're both over 100 years old. So could you just tell me, when you've exhausted the 10-year census that is on Ancestry, and when you've taken several trips to the Registry of Deeds, and you've taken several trips to the town hall, have you ever hit like a stone wall and you are unable to come up with an accurate year of when the house was built?
I have, and I love the detective work of it. When I, many years ago, before I went into grad school, I thought I wanted to be an architect because it was all about the buildings, and it's still about the buildings. But for me, it's really become more of the detective work and the whole story of why these buildings, got built. And yes, I have hit some. What's really frustrating, especially once you start getting into the really older buildings, you don't see as, you can't use the physical evidence as much because there are fewer kind of stylistic changes in the buildings. The chain of title is kind of the backbone of it. And I must admit, I don't usually do this on surveys because it's just not enough, time and or money to do it. But I have been known sometimes with a survey to do the really older houses. I will, if I'm really, really like a dog with a bone, I will actually sometimes do a title search on the building next door, perhaps, because often what you'll get is when you're describing the boundaries of the property, especially when you get to the really older buildings, you'll get, it bounds on so-and-so's land and bounds on so-and-so's land. That's the best I can do. And usually without going into being able to go inside and like really examine how they're put together, it gets really, you can do a best case scenario. It looks like it's probably from XY, the last quarter of the 18th century or the first quarter of the 18th century. Sometimes that's as far as you get, especially because those styles don't change as much. So it's frustrating, but I have been known to do, when I'm a dog with a bone, I have gone a little too far, a little farther than I was supposed to with the genealogy and or the deed research when I just, when it's gnawing at me, trying to figure it out. Short of dendrochronology, when you get to some of those really old ones, sometimes it's awfully hard to tell. Actually, and what MHC finally came up with when did a lot of the, because West Newbury had some of the very early, has some documented first period houses from like the 1660s and such. They even said, MHC said, you know what, at some point you just can't necessarily find out the date without getting inside and dendrochronology. So they have like a set phrase, I can't think of it off the top of my head, but they said, insert this phrase here, as interior examine is outside the scope of the survey. So the nice thing is that MHC recognizes that, but yeah, the detective work is sometimes very frustrating when it doesn't deliver.
Thank you.
That was informative.
Yes, yes. But that, one of the homes was moved, so when you talked about going to the, oh, yeah, it was moved in the 60s, so I mean, that lets that out. Really, I'm hitting a stone wall.
And once they start moving them, West Newbury, once I started really digging, they were moving them all over the place, and I was like, all right.
They did move.
Amazing.
I was really surprised. It wasn't until I did the second phase of it, and I did this one part of town that it wasn't in the first phase, and I was like, and there was references of the house that so-and-so moved and I'm like, oh yeah, people. It's cool. It's hard to imagine people moving them around like puzzle pieces, but the nails and the timber, there was a lot of work that went into that. You weren't gonna just, tear that down, so.
There are several in Dayton that were moved because of streets and because of the chemical company buying out property, so there were several. I don't know how many she'll hit, in her survey,
There were, you're right.
but good luck.
Exactly. Stacy, can you just tell us what you feel your greatest strengths are?
I think it's the kind of, like I said, the dog with a bone. I've worked with different partners over time, and it's interesting. Some of them are very, I like to describe the building. I want to make sure you've got what you need as a commission. Kind of make sure, especially the older, compared to like the old forms, they'll say it's historic, but there's nothing really about like why it's historic or what makes it, what kinds of building materials. I want to give you enough information so that when you're facing tear downs or kind of making municipal decisions, I really want to help you get to that point where you feel educated enough to make a good call on that. I know that's something I struggle with. We struggle with here in Hopkinton. We just got the census results. Hopkinton grew 25% population in 10 years. we're, so we're suddenly facing a lot of tear downs, and we're finding with our older survey that we just, we don't know why something might be historic. It's old, but is that enough? So that's one of the strengths. I really want to make sure I get you enough information so you can make those kinds of calls. And the other part is I really do try and give you a good story, the story behind it. Why this building? Why here? Why are there so many Greek revival houses? What was going on? Why are they, what was going on in the 1840s? Why was, what was the economy like? And I think the more sort of personal you can make it, it kind of connects with people better. I know that's certainly kind of what made the architecture really connect for me when I started getting into this work. It was because I want to be able to make it easier for you to make a good case of if you decide that this really needs to be preferably preserved or whatever you've got with trying to avoid demolitions or just promote things. The more connected you can help people feel, the better off you'll be.
Okay, great. What do you see as your greatest weakness?
Let's see. I know that going with the same thing, dog with a bone, sometimes I do get a little carried away. But that's the beauty for you. That's the beauty of the lump sum, the lump sum project, that's not your problem, that's mine. And I do also, I have known, especially, I know it was an issue for me when I first moved up to Massachusetts from New Jersey. The dates were a little bit different on things. For example, a style that was really popular in New Jersey would be a little bit earlier up here. And so I have learned that when I've got questions about maybe when something was dated, I do have a good network of other consultants who do this kind of work. And I will lean on other people to make sure I'm not off on something. And I have the same consultants I've worked with in the past on some, we team up sometimes. They call me when they need some, when they have a thorny deed research question or some other problem. So I do know that if I'm a little stuck on kind of the architecture of it, that I might be like, oh, I'm not sure if that's exactly the right date. I know I've got some good people I can call on, and it's kind of nice. We've got a network of it that we can help each other out. So.
Okay, great. Awesome. I think we're good. Do you have a question for us?
No, I thought actually with your the project objectives you put out in the RFQ was a really good introduction. Sometimes I see the preliminary target lists, and I kind of wonder where they're, what the plan is, because they're all over the place, and I see things that don't necessarily look like they need to be documented. But from what I looked at, it looks like you guys are in really pretty good shape, and it looks like you've done some good counting. Do you have are you seeing issues with tear downs so much, or is this just more kind of wanting a baseline? Are you looking to do local historic districts, or because that will help guide kind of, well, it all ends up being the same product, but it helps kind of form an idea of how to approach the whole thing.
We have lost a number of homes over the past years. We've lost 2 within the last 2 years. So part of what's driving this is to have good documentation on those older homes so that we have, like you said, the ammunition and the facts that we need to make them preferably preserved. We're also kind of learning about local historic districts and how they would fit in Dayton. But because we were losing some of our older homes so rapidly, that's why we decided to start with the older ones first.
Yeah, that's makes sense. That because sometimes those you have a house that's maybe a little more has a little more wear and tear, but it's on a a nice juicy lot of land.
Right.
It's a hard thing to offset. Yeah, luckily, Hopkinton's seeing some of that too. And actually, it was a really interesting I had a case, was over the winter, where it was right near our home, and it was like, I would have thought it was a done deal, but we had some people who were moving back to the area and bought the house sight unseen without ever coming back from Florida, and it was not winterized. So by the time we saw it, it was water pouring through it in February, and the house was destroyed. And they said, well, now it's destroyed. What, can't we tear it down? And I'm like, no, 'cause I don't know why it should have been winterized, whatever. But listening to some of the other adjoining neighbors, they were like, wait, I don't understand. Why would you preserve this? Why would this? And then I was able to, it was one of the rare cases where we were on Zoom, and I was actually, we had some of the area by another consultant surveyed recently. That was in our phase 1, I guess in 16, 17. And I was able on the Zoom call to just pull up that survey form and plop it into the chat. And then, and one of the men who was the most, he was like, I don't understand. Why is this historic? Why is this? He saw, this house doesn't look like any others. And then I just tossed a couple of the survey forms up. He's like, oh, they all look the same when you look at it. It's like a whole row of houses that were built the same way. And I was like, yes, streetscape. So that's a really good lesson for me, in that sometimes someone who's, can't understand why you would want to preserve something, once they actually see it from the history side and you see all the citations and the other documentation, it, like a light bulb went off. I was like, oh, that's what's pushing me to get CPC and MHC money for Hopkinton for the next round.
Right.
Definitely out of that one episode.
Okay, awesome. Well, Stacy, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
We'll be in touch.
Okay, lovely speaking with you. Have a good night.
Okay, bye, thanks. Okay. All right, did everyone have a chance to go through Stacy's proposal with your rubrics and everything? Are there any questions or concerns?
I just have one question regarding Bill's question. I didn't hear the location when she said she was doing round-the-clock work.
Groveland.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
I don't even know, that must be New Jersey, right?
No, I think that was,
I know it was in the paper, but I couldn't. I guess it's Essex County.
yeah, it was a,
So closer to where she is in Hopkinton.
right. Yes, Groveland, Mass, so.
Okay.
So on our rubric, I felt that Stacy met all of our criteria when I went through it. She certainly has the experience. She has the 5 projects like the rubric requires, the criteria. She has worked with this lump sum kind of contracting that she referred to there too. I was fascinated with her work samples, the bibliography and the footnoting, the detail. It was like really, really good. I was jealous actually.
Yeah, when she said that she likes the people side of it, the
Yeah,
personal side of it, I think that's what I like too, the stories.
yeah,
For example, Rafa, your poor girl in the backyard, who's injured by the dog, that I like the stories, did the house move? Why was it moved? What took over?
right. Does anyone else have any comments they would like to share? I will share with you some of the comments, because I did check the references. I was able to contact 4 out of the 5. They were glowing. As she said, she's worked on the townwide surveys like we're asking in our proposal. She met all the phases on scheduled dates. The project was completed on time. There was no need to push her. They didn't have to say, amount of meat is done. And she got, within price too. So definitely, from Groveland, the woman did mention that she met the requirements of the Mass Historic Commission, so that gave me the clue that she had worked with the Mass Historical Commission, so she's used to what their guidelines are and what their expectations are. When I asked about their working relationship, it was outstanding, responsible, personable, was always available to you. She did the heavy lifting, so she did a lot of the work, She met numerous times with Groveland, drove around to see the houses. And from Groveland, she said she brought in human interest and information as Stacy shared with us. So that was the synopsis of the references. They couldn't say enough good things about her. So, experience-wise, she knew where to look. And so that's good. She was self-motivated, well qualified, she knows what she's doing. And she also gave suggestions as to next steps. And then I'll use her again in a heartbeat. She did an excellent job, wouldn't hesitate to hire her, So based on all of that, and if no one has anything else to add or questions? So Mike, I think when I was looking at it, I have to do probably two motions. One, that the selection committee will be, agree that she meets our goals of the project, and that's for the Mass Historical Commission. And then another motion probably that, we recommend that the board of selectmen execute a contract with Stacy and the town.
Yes.
Okay. All right, so I guess we're ready. So I'll entertain a motion that, based on the selection criteria as summarized in the request for quotes and the price proposal, that we agree, that Stacy Spies best fulfills the goals of the project. So moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Rafa seconds it. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? No abstentions? That passes unanimously. Great, thank you. My next motion that I'll entertain is that the Dayton Historical Commission Selection Committee recommends that the Board of Selectmen execute a contract between the town of Dayton and Stacy Spies Preservation Consultant. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Pat. Is there a second?
I second the motion.
Thank you, Rafa. Any discussion? Okay, let's vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, and that passes unanimously. Thank you, we have a recommendation, right? All right, and that concludes our selection meeting. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Motion to adjourn. No second. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, opposed? We are adjourned.